This story is Enlightenment, and it is based on a real story, a true story. "Good morning, Bob," said Pastor as he entered the thrift store that Saturday morning. "And how are you doing?" "Isn't it a great morning?" answered Bob. "It's a great morning for sure. And man, we're having fun," he added. Bob was always having fun. If he was mopping the floor or changing a tire, it was always fun. And it would never take more than 20 minutes. After a brief exchange, both men parted, each going their separate ways. But within minutes, a truck honked, and Bob went back into the receiving area to see what donations awaited him. Pastor soon joined the store manager to see if he could help. Sometimes donors brought just a bag or two, but often a pickup truck meant furniture or more. Pastor had to walk sideways through the crowded space, stepping over boxes and bags overflowing to reach the back garage door. "We have an opportunity," Bob beamed. "What's that?" asked Pastor unenthusiastically. "Lights." "What kind of lights?" "You know, the kind that go up into a drop ceiling." "Oh, no. They're going to be hard to sell." "How many?" "Oh, about 50 or so." "Bob, you can't be serious. You know we have no space left. It's going to take us years to sell that many lights here. They're going to end up in chicken house number 3. You just know that." The dubious chicken house number 3 was located on Bob's farm. Bob had experienced a variety of opportunities in his long lifetime. Bob never described his opportunities as challenges or misfortunes. One of those was raising chickens for Tyson's, and house number 3 was the one with the roof still intact, where at least stored items could stay out of the rain. Bob replied, "Oh no, this is an opportunity. We can't turn down a donation like this." Pastor said, "Oh, yes we can. We don't have space, and they're never going to sell. It's a very easy decision. Just say no." "Come on. Don't you see? We've got to keep them." And on the disagreement went, reason after reason, until Pastor could see he was defeated. And just as he had been dozens of times before. Bob throws nothing away. If it doesn't sell at the thrift store, it never ends up at the dump just behind the store. After Christmas, truckloads of ornaments go into chicken house number 3. And if a shelf is upgraded because another better one has been donated, the old shelf goes into, you guessed it, chicken house number 3. Pastor could not quell Bob's enthusiasm, and Bob had been a very successful store manager for several years in Mission. So Pastor helped unload the dozens of lights, stacking them deep against the storage wall. It was a hot, long, sticky job, and the 2 men could barely get the garage door closed when they were all done, filling up the last available spot for donations. Bob said, "Boy, we are really having fun now." Pastor said, "Those are going to be here for years to come." "Maybe," admitted Bob, "but it only took us 20 minutes. On that same Saturday morning, hundreds of miles away, Willie stopped the van for gas still another time. It had been more than a day since he had left his mission project, and he was weary of the road. "I can't believe this fill-up is $42.38. This old van is going to drain me dry," thought Willie. Willie went inside, grabbed a cup of coffee, and after pulling the van into a parking spot, drank the coffee while thinking about what he left behind. His mission serves the poorest county in his state, passing on clothing and food, helping with firewood and fuel costs, helping with clean drinking water and plumbing, and most importantly, providing a gathering space for troubled teens and struggling families. The coffee wasn't enough, and Willie drifted into sleep, thinking about the renovations put on hold for lack of funds. His thoughts turned into nightmares of unfinished work and no money and the end to his labor. He saw big wolves chasing him down a mountainside. The nightmares were broken by Willie's snoring, and that jolted him awake. Somewhat rested, but mostly afraid of closing his eyes again, Willie returned to the highway. On Sunday morning, Pastor shared the Bob Light story with anyone who would listen, and then they would both share a laugh at Bob's enthusiasm. There was no doubt that Bob was a pack rat, and this would be his undoing. After worship, Pastor asked Bob and his wife if they would join him on a road trip 45 minutes away to hear a presenter from the Holston Conference. Seemed like a good opportunity to learn more about mission and learn new ways to reach out into the community. So Bob and Patty said, of course. Pastor's wife was a little less enthusiastic, but agreed since she had brought the idea to the group to begin with. Another church member said they'd like to come along, and the five set off to the little rural church where the speaker was to be. They stopped for lunch on the way and enjoyed each other's company so much that they were a little bit late arriving at the church. Even so, they were surprised that there were no cars parked in front. They went up to the building and they found it was open, and the local church pastor was there to greet them, but no one else. Minutes ticked by, and finally a van drove up. Willie jumped out and ran into the church, dismayed to find such a small group. This was supposed to be a district-wide presentation. Willie had already made one presentation the evening before and another just that morning. Neither presentation was well attended, but this was the worst. Only one car outside and only 6 people inside. I should have headed home right after this morning's talk the way I felt like doing. This is a total waste of my time, he thought, and I could have saved some valuable gas money and time. Yet, he thought about the renovations waiting for him and that he needed to give it all that he had. He just really hated disappointing the people waiting back home. So Willie talked in detail to the little group about the mission outreach project of his, and some of his listeners even took notes. They asked good questions and they seemed genuinely interested. Worn out Willie continued, thinking all along, well, maybe this is not going to help me, but at least it's going to help them. Finally, the questions ended, and Willie passed out his wish list. It was lengthy because his mission was needy. Silence filled the room as the group studied the list. Finally, Bob broke the silence. I see lots of things here on your list, but what do you need most? What's the one thing that you need to continue so that your renovations don't come to a standstill when you return home? Willie looked at the list, and after a long silence, he sighed. We need lights. We have a ceiling in, but there's no money left in our budget. We need lights. It's a great big room, and I don't know where we'll ever be able to find that many lights. With all that expense, until we get all the lights, all the work that we've done will have to stop. And we're not going to be able to use this room. It's our gathering space, and we can't use it the way it is. And who knows when that will be. We really need lights. You know, the kind you put in a drop ceiling. Bob's grin grew 2 sizes bigger. As he peered around the table, all of his traveling companions grinned too. They all knew the Bob Light story. The local church pastor and Willie were confused. This isn't funny. Willie's voice had been sad and desperate. Bob quickly explained, "Have I got an opportunity for you? Would 50 or so lights work that are each 4 feet long?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But where can we find those?" asked Willie. Bob replied, "Do you have a way to carry them back to Tennessee?" "Well, I drove our gas-guzzling van here because it was the only vehicle I could trust to get me back here and back. I reckon I could fit what I need in it if I could afford them," explained Willie. "Well, it just so happens," said Bob, "that I have those lights, and they're yours for free if you want them," said Bob. There was laughter and merriment all around as the others explained about Bob the pack rat. Willie couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I knew we needed those lights," said Bob. Pastor agreed and led the closing prayer, praising God for the miracle of lights. After agreeing to help Willie load the lights the next morning, the 5 departed and talked all the way home about this newest way where God had shown them the power that he has to do great things if we are willing spirits and allow him to do his handiwork. They recounted past stories and how God continued to amaze them. Willie met Bob and Pastor at the thrift store early on Monday morning, and the 3 loaded up the van with lights. After stuffing all they could in the van and even tying the back doors closed because the lights stuck out, they fit the last 2 remaining needed lights in the front passenger seat. Willie reflected on his choice to bring the van, even though he thought he was only coming to beg for money, and the 3 men praised God for answered prayers. Willie could hardly wait to get home, where the volunteers would quickly install the lights, and the room could at last be used. Bob pulled some gas money out of the thrift store cash register and wished Willie safe travel home, glowing in the reassurance that he had gained through his newest opportunity. "And it only took 20 minutes, he said, grinning. As the van pulled away, Pastor hugged Bob, so grateful of his unique gifts, and smiled at the newly gained space in the storage area where the lights were gone. Pastor vowed to value Bob's decisions in the future, but both knew what would happen next. As Willie returned across the mountains to Tennessee, he was no longer weary. He was energized and needed no coffee to stay awake. There are no coincidences. There are only God incidences, he reminded himself. How precious, God, that you included me in your great plan. Willie's joy on return was contagious, and within weeks the building was dedicated and the missions continued.
That was very nice. Yes.
Awesome.
You kept our attention.
Yes. You didn't fall asleep?
No.
Should have gotten y'all some coffee. Yeah, really.
I
Some
had
coffee ahead of
I
time.
had coffee.
No, I thought you did extremely well. You put emphasis on portions of it and then quieted down on other portions. You must read a lot to kids or anything like that?
Great children.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And Mike.
Oh, okay. I was going to change Bob's name though to Johnny. It was all I could think of. He bore a striking resemblance to someone I know.
Any feedback about the story itself? Anything comes to mind?
I just have heard a lot of beautiful stories like that all my life. There are no coincidences, no, there aren't. I agree with that. But I think it was a lovely story and you did beautifully, so I don't have anything else to say.
It was, you know, those lights took up so much room. And you know, we have less room now, but it was we were, busting at the seams, and, and he just, wouldn't, we need those lights, Didn't know what for, but, and
This
it's
is
just.
really a true story?
It
Yes.
was,
Bob is persistent.
Can you identify any Enneagram types in those main characters? No, is that too hard?
Enneagram types. Bob just had a feeling that they were important.
Mhm.
So you have to listen to someone when they are that insistent, because they may actually have an inkling of something that's about to take place.
And the pastor might have been more of a head type who saw this practical, ness of where this would go or what would happen. And so that voice was a part of it, and he did too.
Well, thank y'all very much for listening. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Good first assignment, man.
Yes.
You're on your way. I think if others listen to that, you'll have a good audience.
Yeah.
Now, so, those of you that don't know, 90% of that story is true. And the
Okay, it's time for the response to the feedback and to reflect on what changes I might make differently next time. I think the biggest takeaway for me was that the biggest surprise was that the people were not at all bothered by the fabrications that I made in the story. 2 of the 5 people who were my audience, 2 of the 5 had actually participated in the real story themselves, and they just weren't bothered. There's no way they knew. I had to point out to Patty that there's no way I could have known exactly the dialogue, the thoughts that went on in Willie's head, but she acknowledged that, but she thought the story was dead on, and so I was, I guess, perplexed by the willingness of the audience to accept the parts that I made up. So I think that's the first takeaway. At first, when I thought about the story that I wanted to tell, I realized that I couldn't fully develop the characters. So I took the advice of contemplation, and I took some time, and I decided who the protagonist would be, and I just put Willie in an environment, and his dialogue came alive. It just happened. I found that to be easy. I set up the camera to record their reactions. In hindsight, a choice I would make is I would record myself. But in this case, I was really interested in their facial expressions and their body language. And I was so intent on telling the story, I wanted to be able to look back later and see what that was. Another choice that I would make if I were to do this again is I would know my story better. I had just written the story and I wasn't familiar with it, so I found myself reading. I actually practiced twice before I told it to this audience. I told it twice to my husband. Once, and he felt the need to be an editor. So I told it to him twice, and then before I told it to this audience, which included him, I told them up front to relax and enjoy the story, and that it wasn't their job to edit it. Without them knowing, what I was looking for, the feedback was fluffy and nice. I would have liked some constructive criticism. I think that could have helped me to grow as a storyteller. But overall, I would say it was a very positive experience. And if I was going to make a change next time, I would probably try to write a story where I am either the protagonist or the antagonist, to try that, to see how that goes. Thanks.